welcome to this week's episode of the Rock and Roll Heatwave. Speaking of heatwave, the weather's been amazing this morning. It's about 6 a.m. here, and I couldn't sleep last night, so I tossed and turned a lot. So I just got up and hit the shower and set up the video stuff. Like, I'm the kind of guy that just doesn't try to sleep if he can't fall asleep. Anyways, I'm getting a little bit off track here. But yeah, this week's episode is going to have a lot more in store than last week's. We've got some new music to review. Going to do some requests I've gotten in the comments. Thank you very much for that, by the way. We've got the wrestling stuff, the movie stuff, and this week I'm going to be adding in some segments for video games as well as cartoons, animes, and TV shows. I'm kind of gonna put the cartoons, TV shows, and animes in one segment. One week I'll talk about anime, the next week I'll talk about cartoons, whatever comes to mind. But yeah, we've got a lot in store this week, and thank you very much for your comments on my very first episode of the show. They are greatly appreciated, and I love to see your comments and read your input, for sure. Now, before we get started, I want you guys to check out a friend of mine who is hotter than Mexican food. That's right, check out this beautiful girl here. Her name is Dawn, and she is just a sweetheart. She's got quite a bright personality. Obviously, she's stunning. She's got a great sense of humor and is super fun to talk to. So feel free to check out some of her stuff in the description below. And if you're a girl and you want a shout out on any future episodes, 18 plus, comment below. And I will definitely take interest in all of your requests, for sure. Alright, since last week I didn't do any anime, cartoons, or video games or anything like that, I'm gonna start this week's episode off with some anime, and I'm gonna break the ice with the whole anime topic on this show, and I'm just gonna start off by doing my top 8 animes of all time. Number 8 is Yu-Gi-Oh! Number 7 is Heaven's Lost Property. Number 6 is Death Note. What an amazing show. Number 5 is Sailor Moon. That's right. What can I say? I love hot anime chicks. Number 4 is the original Pokemon. Number 3 is Dragon Ball Z. Number 2 is Sword Art Online. And number 1 is Inuyasha. Inuyasha was just perfect. You had the fighting, you had the romance, you had the drama, you had it all in that one show. It was amazing. It took place in a really cool time period in history, and it's just an awesome show to watch. Now, on this week's episode, I'm just going to break the ice with video games, and I'm just going to do my top 10 video games of all time, and then next week, the video game section will be a nice rant on a video game, or a full-on review of a video game, or anything like that, whatever I can come up with. But for this week's episode, I'm just going to do my top 10 video games of all time. Number 10 is Mortal Kombat 2 for the Sega Genesis. Number 9 is Sonic the Hedgehog for the Sega Genesis. Number 8 is Sonic Heroes for the Nintendo GameCube. I'm a big Sonic the Hedgehog fan. Number 7 is Grand Theft Auto 5 for the PlayStation 4. Number 6 is Destiny for the PlayStation 4. Number 5 is Super Mario 3D Land for the Wii U. In my opinion, it's underrated. Number 4 is Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword for the Wii. Number 3 is WWE 2K16 for the PlayStation 4. Number 2 is Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time for the Nintendo 64. One of the greatest games I've ever played, actually. But my number 1 favorite game of all time is Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver for the PlayStation 1. And next week, I'm going to talk about that game in depth. So do stay tuned for next week's video game segment, I guess we're going to call it. Moving on. And now we're going to jump into some music. Alright, as you guys know, I've got a great history in doing album reviews before we did the Rock and Roll Heatwave. And on this show, I want to continue the tradition of good delivering reviews. And I still believe that I have a part in the album reviewing community. And we're going to kick off this week's Music Fix with some new releases, a throwback requested by a fellow fan, as well as some other requests by some fans who commented on last week's episode. Reminding you that you can indeed comment any album that you would like a review of in any future episode. Alright, before I get into the new albums, I am going to do some requests. So firstly, I would like to thank fellow YouTuber Vegan Zombies for requesting a review of this album. The album that has been requested for me to do is called Citadel by Ne Obliviscarius, and I have indeed listened to it. Now, if you haven't heard of these guys, they are pretty damn good. They are a 6-piece progressive death metal band that emerged from Australia, I believe. And they've been around since 2004 or so, or early to mid-2000s. Now, this band is quite unique. They are not your typical band with just guitar, vocals, bass, and drums. They've got violins and a whole variety of instruments like piano, strings, as well as influences. They've got a whole variety of influences. They've got the obvious influences of black metal, thrash metal, and melodic death metal, but they've also got some unexpected influences in their music such as avant-garde, jazz, classical, and even flamenco, which is pretty cool. Now, this album, Citadel, came out only a couple years ago. I believe the exact year is 2014, and in my opinion, at least, is a masterpiece. This album is phenomenal. It really shows an incredible variety of styles and moods all throughout the album. As I said earlier, this band is known to do that. And the songs truly have fantastic structure. Each song was done really well. There was no half-assing at any point in the album. These guys are serious and passionate and put in all of the hard work they can to create a masterpiece. And once again, this album demonstrates just that. You also see how much these guys have grown at the point in which they did this album compared to their releases prior to it. Over time, they have only gotten better and better. And some areas of this album deliver fantastic emotion with the excellent use of violins and pianos that go at quite a slow pace. And the one song that I really wanted to point out on this album is Painters of the Tempest Part 2, which is about 16 minutes long. This song was one of my favorites off the album. It had several portions within the song with beautiful transitions. You know, you didn't just have one thing going on here throughout the entire song. There's soaring guitar solos, some soothing and smooth bass lines, and even some violin solos. It's incredible, and each instrument gets the chance to shine. It's not an instance where you have too many cooks in the kitchen. It's simpler than that. It's more peaceful. Again, it's beautiful. You know, it's really hard for me to say anything bad about this album because I enjoyed it in its entirety. It's beautiful. It's dark. You know, it's a beautiful, dark masterpiece, I guess you can call it. And it's an album that I strongly, strongly recommend, especially if you're into progressive death metal. You know, I wanted to thank fellow YouTuber Blanton Stamey, who has been a longtime fan here on this channel, for requesting this album, entitled Die Without Hope by a deathcore band known as Carnifex, who formed around the mid-2000s or so. Now, personally, I never got heavily into deathcore, but I am open-minded to it. Some of it is pretty good. I am a Rings of Saturn fan indeed. I mean, they do fall under deathcore unless aliencore is a serious thing. But, anyways, I listened to this album, Die Without Hope, with an open mind, and honestly, these guys are one of the better bands in this deathcore genre. They are actually pretty good, and they fully admit their place in the deathcore genre, and they don't really have an issue with it. They don't try to hide it. They're pretty straightforward about it, which is pretty cool. I mean, this album has pretty much got everything you would love or hate about deathcore. Throughout the whole album, really, you've got the blast beats, the chugging, and the breakdowns all over the album. But they aren't really trying to be something different, as I mentioned earlier. They keep it pretty simple, which helps you open your mind to the music a bit more. And honestly, this album is a good listen. It's straight up deathcore, no sugarcoating at all. And this album is probably their best work, at least in my opinion, after listening to some of their other albums. You've even got the interludes of piano and strings that come in and give the album sort of a dark melodic feel, which I personally really, really dig. The one song that I really enjoyed off this album was Dark Days, and I really felt that it went for that dark melodic feel. This album is straightforward, it's great, and definitely something I recommend, especially if you're trying to open yourself to the deathcore genre in its entirety. I wanted to thank fellow YouTuber Josh Christensen for requesting a review of this throwback album, Signify by Porcupine Tree. Now, I've talked about Porcupine Tree before, and I am indeed a fan of them. One of my favorite albums by them, as I've mentioned in the past, is Lightbulb Sun. But this album is quite the special album, Signify, I'm talking about. It's another one of my personal favorites by the band. With Porcupine Tree and Steven Wilson, there are times where you don't know what to expect, but you know that it will be awesome no matter what. And the one song that I really wanted to point out on this album was Sleep of No Dreaming, which is astonishingly beautiful yet incredibly dark. It really was the song that struck me when I listened to this album. And this album was really the first album by Porcupine Tree to showcase the band in its entirety, not just Steven Wilson, which allowed the introduction of things such as metal guitars, giving this album an incredibly unique sound compared to most of Porcupine Tree's catalog. This album is like a mix of atmospheric ambience fused with hard rock and somewhat of a metal sound, creating this beautiful blend. I have always been a fan of this album and its total awesomeness. So recently Radiohead put out their 9th studio album. They were popular in the late 90s. But yeah, I've listened to this new album and it's called A Moon-Shaped Pool. Now this album is different. It is much different than past Radiohead albums. This album leads you into uncertainty. It's actually quite strange in a cool way. It's more inviting than their previous album for sure. I mean, the meaning of the lyricism is far more welcoming and it is much easier to understand through most of the album. Now, the first song I want to talk about is Burn the Witch, which is one of the more popular songs off this album. It came out a little while before the album did, and it is a pretty good song. Now, this song gets into a popular theme in Radiohead's music, conformity. And you also hear some lyricism getting into the severe paranoia of witch hunts in the old days, assuming why this song is called Burn the Witch. A witch hunt meaning the search for a person who may possibly be a witch or something like that. It's actually a pretty cool track and gives Radiohead fans typically what they are looking for. The other song I want to talk about is Daydreaming, and this song is phenomenal, and it really stuck with me. It's one of my favorites off the album. It's quite the hypnotic, relaxing, somewhat ambient, and more chilled out track, which is suiting to the title, Daydreaming. You've got quite a simple arrangement. There's nothing too complicating going on in the instrumentation. The song mainly explores the flaws of dreamers, possibly implying that the dreamers prefer to live in their dreams rather than reality, so much that they end up disconnecting themselves from the rest of the world and they grow attached to their own world. They end up stuck in their own bubble, which while the rest of the world is still going, these people are just stuck in their own minds, and these people in some cases are so far gone that they have reached a point of no return. I mean, meaning that they'll simply never find a way to enjoy their reality. Such an awesome meaning to a fitting song, but there's more in this song than just that. I mean, in my opinion, I see Thom getting a bit into his relationship with his wife, Rachel Owen, later in the song, whom he had separated from after about 23 years of marriage. Which this actually makes the song a bit more universal, which is pretty cool. Each verse in the song gets into some pretty deep stuff, actually. Such as the sun being the source of light, which symbolizes something pure. But the song ends with Thom repeating "half my life" in reverse, over and over, which could be hinting the topic of his marriage, because he was married for about half of his life. Since the lyrics are reversed, personally, I feel like Thom is dwelling and he wishes he could turn back time. This song was my favorite off the album, and one of my favorite Radiohead songs ever, actually. It was such an incredible, yet simple, yet deep and connective song. In the end, I really enjoyed this album. They also get into topics such as climate change in another track, which is, I think the song was "People Have the Power." And but all in all, this album was incredible. It was eerie, it was dark and bone-chilling, yet beautiful, calming, and soothing at the same time. If I were to rate this album, I would give it a 9 out of 10, for sure. Now for this part of the show, we get into the Pro Wrestling Fix. Last week I gave a bit of input on the downfall of the WWE's ratings and whatnot. Today I want to talk about a different wrestling organization. Today I want to talk about TNA Wrestling, an organization that had so much potential. It had the chance to be the next WCW, and it could have been direct competition with the WWE, but boy did they drop the damn ball, and they dropped the ball pretty damn fast. Let's go back to the early/mid 2000s. TNA was emerging after the death of WCW, and you first saw TNA as a new WCW, but over time things began to change, and you saw that they were far more than just the next WCW. There was something new, something cool, something that was drawing attention from the fans. Not only did they have the lineup of former WWE and WCW stars, guys like Sting, Jeff Hardy, Kevin Nash, Kurt Angle, Christian Cage, Tara, Booker T, Scott Steiner, Gail Kim, and even Scott Hall here and there, who all at the time, or whatever time they were in TNA, could still go. They were still over, especially some of them with the fans. But they also had an incredible wave of new homegrown talent. Guys like Samoa Joe, AJ Styles, Bobby Roode, Eric Young, the Motor City Machine Guns, Jay Lethal, Sanjay Dutt, The Beautiful People, Tracy Brooks, Low Key, Kazarian, Christopher Daniels, so many more at the time. And each of the wrestlers I just mentioned now were drawing. They were over big time at some point in their TNA careers. And at the time, it was just so incredible to see, because fans were growing tired of traditional pro wrestling and they wanted to see something different, something a little more edgy. And during this time, TNA Wrestling was giving us just that. At the time, TNA did make some mistakes here and there, though. There were some really good angles and matches, but there were also some pretty bad matches and some ridiculous stuff, such as the Last Rites match, the Reverse Battle Royal, too much Jeff Jarrett and Macho Man attempting to get back in the ring years past his prime and in the midst of a midlife crisis. These were the early days, though, so the good stuff really outshined the bad stuff. But over time, we reach a point where TNA has 2 million viewers. But then, oh boy, Mick Foley getting back in the ring with Ric Flair, Hogan comes back, Nash and Hall get back in the ring, Jeff Hardy shows up drugged up to a main event, the older guys not making room for the young upcoming stars and the homegrown talent, bringing in the ECW guys well past their prime, mimicking WWE storylines, Dixie Carter, backstage issues, losing the Spike TV network, losing the Destination America network, and then you've got nearly empty arenas and popular homegrown talent leaving for other companies. You've got TNA losing Panda Energy, they're losing money, and all of that. You know, this whole downward spiral I'm talking about happened in a period of 3 to 4 years. They went from 2 million viewers all the way down to a bit over 100,000 viewers. And they lost 2 television network deals in 2 years. And the product has been really watered down. We used to have good storylines as well as good wrestling in TNA, but now it's all wrestling. It's all high spots and crazy moves. Like I said before, wrestlers need characters. They can't just rely on high spots and matches to get over. They need really good storylines and good character build-up. But honestly, after all of this, it is really sad to see where TNA has gone and what TNA has become, because it had a tremendous amount of potential and opportunity at one point, and they really, really dropped the ball. And now with NXT going on and homegrown TNA talent shifting over to NXT, I don't really think I see much of a future with TNA, at least not with what they once had. You know, it's sad for sure. Now on the movie fix of this episode, I'm not just going to talk about one movie. I'm talking about an entire film franchise here. One of my favorites of all time, the Star Wars saga. Now let me start off by saying I love Star Wars. I have seen all of the movies dozens of times, if not more, and in each movie there's stuff that I really liked, and there's stuff that I obviously didn't like. And I'm going to break this down into a countdown format, because if I don't, this rant will go on for hours and it'll be all over the place. So I'm just going to do my top 10 best things in Star Wars, and then my top 10 worst things in Star Wars. So we're going to start off with the best. Number 10 is the music. Number 9 is Darth Vader's unmasking. Number 8 are the lightsaber fights in the prequels. Number 7 are the landscapes in the prequels. Number 6 is Darth Maul. Number 5 is Natalie Portman as Padme Amidala. Number 4 is Obi-Wan fucking Kenobi. Number 3 is basically anytime Yoda would pull out his lightsaber and fight. You know, that was pretty badass. Number 2 is Rey's vision in The Force Awakens. And number 1 is the overall psychology in the films. Now, the 10 worst things, in my opinion, in Star Wars. Number 10 is Han Solo's death, spoiler. Number 9 is the droids. Number 8 is Obi-Wan learning to contact Qui-Gon Jinn, and that it was never shown or spoken about or anything. They just brought it up at the end of Revenge of the Sith. Number 7 was barely any Luke Skywalker in The Force Awakens. Number 6 was Palpatine in Revenge of the Sith. Number 5 is Hayden Christensen. Number 4 is the quick death of Count Dooku. Number 3 is Kylo Ren. Number 2 is George Lucas remastering and editing the originals. And number 1 is Jar Jar Binks. I wanted to thank you guys for watching this week's episode of the Rock and Roll Heatwave. And thank you for your comments below. And see you next week.